All right, so we're diving into something pretty crucial today. How to make those amazing community organizations we all love, the ones that are really making a difference, how do we help them go the distance?
Yeah, it's about long-term sustainability, right?
Oh.
Not just barely scraping by, but truly thriving.
Exactly. And lucky for us, we've got this awesome handbook, Roots of Resilience, specifically Chapter 10, Long-Term Sustainability and Future Outlook. Sounds like someone's got big plans and wants to make sure their efforts really stick around.
Absolutely. And this chapter doesn't mess around. It's full of insights. Not just theory, but real examples of communities that have actually made it work.
That's what I love about this handbook. It's like, okay, here's the dream, buddy, here's how people actually made it a reality. So where do we even begin with all of this?
Well, the first hurdle the handbook tackles is something a lot of groups struggle with, maintaining their institutional memory.
Institutional memory, huh?
Hmm.
Is that like when, can't remember where I put my keys.
Haha, sort of. But imagine losing vital information about an organization's history, their processes, all the lessons learned along the way.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a recipe for disaster,
Mm,
especially if a group relies heavily on a few key people.
exactly. The handbook calls it knowledge fade out, and it can really cripple a group. So what's the solution? Documentation. But not just those dusty old files in the back.
Okay, so what kind of documentation are we talking about here?
Think of it like living documents. User-friendly guides, templates for common tasks, even digital archives that are easy to access and update.
So like if a new volunteer joins, they can get up to speed quickly.
Exactly, almost like a recipe book for community action.
That's brilliant.
Hmm.
But isn't there more to it than just writing things down? Like the human element of passing on knowledge directly.
Absolutely. That's where knowledge transfer comes in. Mentorship programs, apprenticeships, workshops where the veterans share their wisdom. These are all essential.
Like that old master-apprentice model, right? Passing the torch to the next generation.
Precisely. And speaking of passing the torch, another big piece of the puzzle is leadership succession.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. You don't want everything to fall apart when someone retires or moves on.
Yeah.
What did the handbook say about that?
Well, one example that really stuck out was the Mondragon Corporation in Spain. It's this network of worker-owned cooperatives that have been going strong for decades.
Wow, decades. They must be doing something right.
Right. And a big part of their success is their awesome approach to leadership development. They're not scrambling to fill a vacancy when it pops up. They're always grooming future leaders.
So they've got a deep bench ready to step up. That's impressive.
Exactly. That foresight is a hallmark of organizations that are truly built to last.
Okay, so we've got strong internal systems.
Hmm.
But organizations don't exist in a vacuum, right? They need support from the outside world, too.
Absolutely. That's where building alliances comes in. The handbook stresses that even the most amazing local groups, they can't do it all alone.
It takes a village, as they say. But how do groups go about making those connections? It can be daunting, especially for smaller ones.
Well, the handbook suggests a few avenues. Partnering with NGOs, for instance, can be a game changer. They often have the expertise, the funding, the networks that local groups lack.
So it's like each organization brings their own strengths, and together they create something even bigger.
Exactly. Think of environmental NGOs working with villages on reforestation projects, or health NGOs providing training and supplies to community clinics.
It's about leveraging those strengths to create a bigger impact. What about government agencies? That could be tricky, right?
Navigating bureaucracy is never fun, but the handbook makes a strong case for working with government bodies, not against them.
Okay, so building bridges instead of burning them. Got it. But how do you even start that conversation?
It's about understanding the government's priorities, seeing where they align with your goals, and then making a compelling case for collaboration. When it works, it can open up amazing opportunities: funding, permits, even supportive legal frameworks.
It's like learning a new language, the language of government, finding that common ground where everyone wins.
Absolutely. And then don't forget the power of international networks. Connecting with groups facing similar challenges across the globe can be incredibly empowering.
It's like a massive support group A&D brainstorming session, all rolled into one. Sharing best practices, learning from each other's mistakes.
Exactly. The handbook uses the example of transition towns, which have created this global network of communities focused on climate resilience. They share ideas that have worked in vastly different contexts.
Wow, that cross-pollination of ideas must be invaluable. especially for complex issues like climate change.
It is. It's about recognizing that we're not alone in this. We're part of this global movement of people striving for a better future.
It's powerful stuff. So we've talked about memory, alliances,
Mhm.
but the world throws curveballs. How do these organizations deal with all the unexpected changes?
That's where adaptive resilience comes in. And it's a big topic, especially with things like climate change, economic instability, and technology changing so rapidly.
That sounds like a whole other conversation.
It is, and it's one we'll dive into next time.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground, strong internal systems, building those powerful alliances. But the world's always changing, right? How do these organizations adapt to all the unexpected challenges?
That's where adaptive resilience comes in. Being able to roll with the punches, to be flexible, to constantly learn and evolve. It's crucial, especially with climate change throwing so many curveballs.
Right. I've seen communities that just weren't prepared when disaster hit. It's like they were reacting to the crisis instead of trying to prevent it.
Absolutely. And the handbook stresses that it's not enough to just react. We need to be proactive, especially with climate change.
So instead of just cleaning up after a flood, you're also planting trees to stop erosion, building seawalls to protect against rising sea levels. It's about thinking ahead.
Exactly. It's about combining immediate action with long-term planning, not just putting out fires, but working to prevent them in the first place. And that same thinking applies to economic shifts, too.
Oh, for sure. I think a lot of people underestimate how much economic changes can impact communities. Like what happens when an industry dries up or gets automated?
That's where diversification comes in. It's all about spreading the risk, building a more stable base for the community.
So instead of putting all your eggs in one basket, you have multiple ways to generate income, multiple resources, kind of like a diversified investment portfolio, but for a whole community.
That's a great analogy. And it goes beyond just the financial side. It's about fostering that sense of self-reliance, that resourcefulness.
So people know how to adapt, how to use what they have, even when things change.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's technology. It's a game changer, for better or for worse.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
It can connect people, provide information and resources, but
But it can also disrupt traditional ways of life, even make inequalities worse.
I remember reading about a community that lost their main income source because a factory automated its production. Devastating.
That's the thing. Technology brings advancements, but you have to be thoughtful about it. The handbook talks about that. Using technology for good, but being aware of the downsides too.
So not rejecting it outright, but being selective,
Yeah.
putting the community's needs first,
Exactly. It should be a tool for empowerment, not a source of more problems.
which means we need to be having these conversations, right?
Yeah.
How do we integrate technology in a way that benefits everyone? How do we make sure everyone has the skills to thrive in a tech-driven world?
Those are the key questions. And the handbook really stresses that dialogue, critical thinking about technology. We can't just embrace every new gadget blindly.
We need to think about the impact, both good and bad.
Absolutely. It's a balancing act, for sure. But that's what resilience is all about, isn't it? Constantly learning, adapting.
You nailed it. Resilience isn't the destination, it's the journey. And that journey needs a commitment to learning and to embracing change.
You got it. And speaking of ongoing learning, that's what the last part of the chapter focuses on. Next steps, keeping the momentum going. It gets really interesting.
Because it's not enough to just survive, right? You want to thrive. What do the handbooks say about that?
It goes beyond just surviving and starts exploring how to really flourish in the face of change. It says we can't just sit back and relax. We have to keep learning, keep adapting, keep innovating.
Because getting complacent, that's the killer of resilience, right? You can't just reach a point of stability and coast. You have to keep pushing forward, experimenting, finding new ways to strengthen things.
That's it. And it takes a culture of innovation. Being willing to try new things, experiment, and learn from both the wins and the losses.
It's like creating a space where people feel safe to take risks, to think differently, to come up with those creative solutions.
I love that you mentioned spaces because the handbook does too. Think community workshops, brainstorming sessions, even hackathons, bringing people together to tackle local issues.
It's like fostering that community-wide problem-solving spirit. Hey, we can do this attitude.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be these huge revolutionary ideas. Sometimes the most impactful stuff comes from those small-scale experiments. Trying things out, getting feedback, and making adjustments along the way.
It's about constant improvement, building on what works, and learning from what doesn't.
Precisely. And through it all, communication is key. Open, honest dialogue. The handbook really emphasizes that.
Making sure everyone's voice is heard, everyone feels like they're part of the process.
Exactly. That's how you build a community that's truly resilient, one that can not only weather the storms, but also thrive in the face of change. It's about a future that's sustainable, just, equitable, and fulfilling for everyone.
It's really inspiring to see how these seemingly small things, like documenting processes, sharing knowledge, building those connections, how they can add up to create huge change in a community.
It's like a ripple effect. Every action, every connection, every conversation contributes to this larger movement toward a more resilient future.
But it all starts with that first step, right? That willingness to get involved, to learn, and to work together.
And that's where our listener comes in. They have the power to be part of this movement, to contribute to a more resilient and sustainable future for their community.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the key message you hope our listeners take away?
Well, I hope they realize that building resilient communities isn't about reaching some finish line. It's an ongoing process. It takes constant learning, adapting, and a willingness to embrace change.
It's not about finding one perfect solution. It's about constantly experimenting, refining, and improving along the way.
You got it. And it's not a solo mission either. Building resilience requires collaboration, dialogue, and a commitment to making sure everyone has a say.
So making sure everyone's voice is heard and they feel a sense of ownership over the process.
Absolutely. And ultimately, I hope our listener remembers that the strongest communities are built on shared values, a sense of purpose that goes beyond individual needs and connects us to something bigger.
It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected, that our well-being is tied to the well-being of our communities and the planet as a whole.
That's beautifully put. So go out there and build those resilient communities. Experiment, collaborate, and never stop learning. The future depends on it.
And remember, you don't have to do it alone. The Roots of Resilience Handbook is an awesome resource, full of practical advice and inspiring examples. But the real magic happens when we take those ideas and start putting them into practice in our own unique ways.
So what are you waiting for? Get out there and make a difference.
And that's a wrap for this episode of The Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time.